Well, you might remember last week that I said that the final verses of Mark's Gospel had a particular character that was different from the rest of the Gospel. The most common view today is that these verses from 9 to 20 really aren't verses that Mark himself wrote, that what Mark wrote ended at verse 8. So how, you say, did Bible commentators come to that conclusion? Well, there are lots of technical reasons for that, and I suppose they're not going to be very helpful to us today. But briefly, the style of these last verses is different. There is no connection between 8 and 9. It's a very jarring connection between the two. The language used is not the same, and what we have in 9 to 20 simply looks like a summary of all the gospel appearances of Jesus after the resurrection, and added to that, the Great Commission as well. So it's all pieced together in that way. Now, possibly you've noticed in your own Bible that the oldest versions of the Gospel don't include these particular verses that we've read today. And even the fact that they're written now in italics in most Bibles shows that they are different. It's believed, though, that these are old verses. They're not a recent or a relatively recent addition to Mark's Gospel. They're not as old as the Gospel itself, but they're very nearly as old as the Gospel itself. So somebody added them because they considered it inappropriate for the Gospel to end with the word afraid. Didn't want to give the impression that the disciples were afraid, especially given the circumstances into which Mark was writing. Well, then the obvious question to that is, why are we looking at them today? Well, in a sense, that's very easy to answer. Because they are there. And we want to complete our study of Mark's Gospel even by looking at these verses. They're there in the Bible before you, and most Bibles still include them. Most of us grew up accepting that they were part of Mark's Gospel. But now you ask, well, isn't that a dangerous thing to do? To look at them, to study them, to consider them important just because they're there? No, not really. Most of these verses are gleaned from the rest of the New Testament. We can find them in other places. And with the possible exception of drinking poison, we can go to other places in the New Testament and corroborate what is written in these few verses at the end of Mark. So what's here is comprised of biblical material. It's not just the way Mark would have written it or how Mark might have said it. The second thing is that while it draws on other gospel writings, it provides further confirmation of the resurrection and gives us a firm foundation for what comes in the command of verse 15, to go into all the world and preach the gospel to every creature, or to all creation, as it says in Mark's Gospel. And really what that means is that the gospel has to be communicated, told, preached to every person. So that's a task that we're left with. That's not a task that's been completed. The church is still to do that today. It's part of our commission as believers. Now, it hasn't been completed. The work is not finished, and we still need to engage in it. We still need to do that. A few years ago, I read this book, Imagine Church, by a man called Neil Hudson. And he works for the London Institute of Contemporary Christianity. And I want to read you something that he has written, which I read again through the course of the week. Not for this, but I'll explain in a moment or two why. This is what he said. It is rare, very rare, to find a church where the main thing is exactly what Jesus identified as the main thing. Go and make disciples was Jesus' final instruction to the disciples he had made. Now, if the author of Mark's, or these few verses at the end of Mark's Gospel, drew on Matthew's account of the Great Commission and the memories of apostles who were round at the time, then we need to think about how we go about this business of sharing the good news. And we need to think about how we do that. Now, I've been thinking over the last few days about this time out, about this time when we cannot meet together. I've been asking myself what God is mainly saying to us through these days, what he's saying to his church. And when we are able to meet together again, what will we consider to be essential church? What will be essential to the church? Now, I'm going to leave that question hanging in the air, and we'll come back to it in a few moments' time. But while we prepare, let's again praise God as we sing the next hymn. It's a hymn that we're familiar with by Stuart Townend, What Wonder of Grace Is This.